Welcome back to The Owner's Seat, the show where fitness and wellness operators, franchisors, and franchisees get real about what drives outcomes, clean cash flow, defensible pricing, retention, unit economics, and systems that don't collapse under growth and expansion. Today's guest is one of the most practical voices on the internet when it comes to building the financial models that actually run your company. Especially when the data is messy, the team is moving fast, and the decisions still have to get made. Chris Reilly, I'm sure you've seen him on LinkedIn, is a private equity and FP&A veteran and the founder of Financial Modeling Education. He's taught over 91,000 students how to build financial models from scratch, and he specializes in what most owners face in the real world: imperfect inputs, messy data, incomplete reports, and the pressure to still answer to that board or private equity group what's happening in the business and what are you going to do next. In this episode, we're going to make modeling feel operator grade, specific to what you all do each and every day in the fitness and wellness space, how we turn messy studio data into clean 3-statement model. Geez, as I'm reading this, Chris, I'm already fired. My brain is stimulating. This is so good. The 3-statement model, y'all. I just get excited with stuff like this. Why support schedules are where models live or die. How to build error checking so you can actually trust the file. Why AI doesn't replace fundamentals, but it amplifies it. And finally, my favorite, how we make cash visibility, including that 13-week cash flow forecast, understandable for the business owner. Chris, thank you so much for being on. Welcome to the Owner's Seat podcast, sir.
Thanks so much for having me. That's probably the best intro I think I've ever received. Thank you.
Oh man, well shoot, I could have went even lengthier because you are probably the busiest guy that I follow on LinkedIn and I say digitally. Now we're getting to know each other. I can't believe you said yes to this, by the way, because I was like, there's no way. There's no way. He's too busy. Seriously, I've been following your stuff for quite a long time, and you just never cease to I just impress every time, just the amount of detail and time you take to educate. And I wanted to start there. Where did this all come from? Like this servant leadership, servant minded approach, the wanting to educate others, because if people watch, and they will after this, the stuff you're going over is not a 10-second, okay, this is detailed stuff, but so important, especially for the business owner.
Yeah, well, thanks for saying that. First off, it all came from personal experience, and it really came back to my private equity days when I just felt like I was getting crushed. Like I was working 60, 80-hour weeks, and I just felt unprepared. And I had to learn a lot of stuff the hard way. And so where this whole education angle came from was just, I sat down during COVID and started to record myself building models, frankly, just to help me with my own deals. And then a few people reached out and said, hey, can I get access to these recordings? And I was fortunate that they were very well received. And so this light bulb kind of went off in my head of like, oh, you know what? There could be a business here. And that's how I got into the education piece. But I wanted to make sure, even though I start talking to a broader audience, that I still stayed really detailed and very specific, because that was the level of work that it took to actually perform in private equity and also like managing the FP&A functions for these companies. And so I just said, you know what, maybe I'm going to be a little bit more niche than everybody else, but I think there's an angle here that's different and more detailed. And I think if I just put it out there, then we'll kind of see how that goes. And the reception's been good. So I've been
amazing.
Doing it ever since.
It's been great. No, everyone that I connect with on LinkedIn or go to some of these conferences, right? The FP&A Summit, CFO Leadership Council, a CFO Alliance Group, they all know Chris Reilly. They know who you are, right? Because you're putting out such amazing things. So thank you for doing it. It's obviously, I got a little bit of job security because of the education I'm getting from all the things that you're putting out there. So thank you. My wife and kids appreciate it too, Chris. So thank you for that.
No, that means everything.
So you mentioned angles and private equity, and that just made me think a lot of the owners listening today, they've heard me say this. There's this cycle happening, right? Private equity, you see roll-ups all the time, right? In different industries. What's happening now, and it started late Q4 of last year, and we're forecasting a 3-year sprint here with private equity coming back into the fitness and wellness space. Definitely the wellness and longevity space, but back into the studio space too. A big symbol of this, or really that's making this happen in a big way. You obviously have the Planets of the world, and anytime EOS Fitness has really made a good mark. People are starting to figure out this business model. It's been an amazing cash flow driver. So the questions that are now coming up are, well, private equity is coming into town. Are they going to be my competitor? You don't want that because they're going to surround you with 3 to 4 studios. Or are they going to come purchase my location or locations? So I need to get ready for that exit strategy. What's happening is people wait too long. And I'd love to take that angle today. I'd imagine you hear this all a lot. What's my business worth? And someone sends you over a file, right? Maybe it's messy data. Maybe it's organized. When you get something like that, you get that question, what am I worth? And then you have access to their data. What are some of the problems that you see from the get-go, and how do you orient yourself real quickly? Like, okay, here are the first 3 things I need to do with this.
So I think there's a couple things that lead into that. And one is people sometimes start with delusions of grandeur, unfortunately. They might have a successful business and they're informed by somebody with genuine intentions, but just perhaps incorrectly that, oh, your business is worth, 6 or 7 times your EBITDA or your revenue. And I'll get into talking about that, but that might not necessarily be true. But that kind of sparks this flame of, hey, let me take this thing out to market. And so then they'll call up either a guy like me or perhaps a banker, whoever it is, somebody who's kind of in the M&A space, and they say, what is the business worth? And really, when you're selling a business, it's a lot like selling a house. You kind of have to compare it to similar houses or similar businesses. And, just like you compare the structure and the furnishings of a home, you're looking at the the systems of a business, and then ultimately how much cash does that generate? And typically you're buying companies based on a multiple of the free cash flow. We often simplify it by calculating an EBITDA just because it makes the company more comparable. And so when somebody sends me a P&L, the first thing I'm going to do is I need to get a sense of the EBITDA, and it's the basic EBITDA. So just we add back the depreciation, the amortization, taxes, and any interest, which typically there isn't at a smaller company, but sometimes there is. That makes the business truly comparable to another that is similar. And then we start there. And then we say, well, what is the market paying for it, right? If you're in a neighborhood of $1 million homes, well, it's probably going to go right around there, a similar house, right? If you're going to look at a business that's similar and it goes for 3 to 5 times your earnings, well, then we kind of start there. We say, okay, well, maybe we have goalposts, and this is maybe what this company is worth. And then that's where we start. But usually it's messy financials. It could be PDF that just goes down to net income. And you kind of need somebody with the strategic mindset to say, all right, I've got this probably an accrual-based P&L, but even sometimes cash-based. How do I get an EBITDA figure so I can at least start planning how to take this out to market? And then once I get there and start having those conversations, the investors are going to care about, well, then how do we also turn these operations into cash? So you're getting a much more clear picture of what could I take it out for, and then how does it cash flow back to the new owners? And I love it. As an owner operator, you might not be thinking about that. You're just kind of looking at the bank account or checking out the net income and be like, okay, my business is good enough. But there's a larger lens that has to take place first.
I love that. And you're right. I think a lot of the owners that I chat with, especially in this space, is, the problem that I see is they get very married to the P&L. I say that a lot because that's the way we're trained, right? If you think about it, more often than not, if you know anything about business, it's probably the income statement, right? That's kind of, as an operator, it's kind of what many people are paid off of that as far as variable comp goes, or when you get to that leadership spot, which many of these owners are or came from, that's what you know. When you start talking about the balance sheet, statement of cash flows, and I know you talk a lot about the 13-week cash flow forecast, this is where we lose people. But what I really want people to know, like you got to jump into these things. From a P&L's perspective, I do want to kind of unravel that EBITDA piece too, because you're right. There's the wishful thinking. I'm worth $10 million. Right? Because of my revenue, or maybe because of my EBITDA, which I've I've taken out a lot of expenses that maybe the traditional owner would have taken. And maybe that's like salary. I moved it off to the side. I figured that out. Or maybe it's whatever expenses it might be. How can you explain how you come up with the correct valuation, whether that is maybe they're not considering some of those expenses are actually just one time, like think add back strategy. And I don't want to lose anyone here, but it's really important that you understand what this add back is. But even the reverse where, I had an opportunity recently. I'm looking at multi-unit. I'm going unit by unit. I'm like 50 cents on the dollar. Like this is unheard of. Like I'm just scratching my head. I'm like, how do they keep this secret so good? And then I noticed there's a holding company. And I'm like, now I smell blood in the water. If I'm if I'm the investor doing a Q of E, there's something going on here. We're extracting the expenses from each unit. It's not a true four-wall EBITDA. How do you find all of these things? Is that you through reps? Are you going line by line? How do you do it?
So I like to break it down into a few different buckets, and you kind of work your way up to what you think the EBITDA is going to be going forward. And the whole reason that we do this for somebody who's not super familiar is we're trying to say, hey, what can this business do going forward? It maybe made a few mistakes in the past or spent money on things we shouldn't have, but we've learned all those lessons now, and we want to know what will it do in the future? And in the future, can it make money for an investor? And so that's where this idea of EBITDA comes in. You strip out things that theoretically are temporary. And so as an example, if you pull out the interest, just to go through one example, you do what's called add back the interest expense to your net income, because if a company isn't financed with debt, it would not have the interest expense. So you're trying to illustrate what it theoretically could do from a profitability standpoint. And so you talked about owner comp or other one-off expenses, that's sort of part two. Part one is let's get to the definitional EBITDA, which is the earnings before the interest, tax, depreciation, amortization. And then we go discretionary. And now we're talking owners had above market comp. So we're going to reduce some costs there. We hired a consultant for a one-time implementation that we didn't need it. We had to pay cash for it. It hurt our earnings at the time, but we're not going to need it in the future. So we add that cost back, and we create this illustrative bottom line of what kind of profit can we expect the business to do going forward. And so I usually break it into those pieces, the definitional piece and then the discretionary piece. And then that gets me to the bottom line, and that I will take out to market and compare it to similar companies. And that's how we get a cleaner valuation.
Excellent. I love it. And one of the things you post about is this five layer model structure, and that it's just a must, right? And you've shown what that looks like too, which again, love that you don't just post out there. It's like, I'm going to do this video. I'm going to show you. I'm like, this is awesome. But you start with raw data, which is typically the case, especially nowadays. Everyone's trying to modernize the tech stack. So they're realizing how important clean data is, or just having data in general. So you start with this raw data into your support schedules, which I can't wait to tap into because I see a big miss here. The 3 statements or a 3-statement model, summaries, and then your control panel or source of truth. Can you walk through that a little bit deeper, maybe at its basic level, right? But just so that everyone understands, we need to have these layers in your finance back office.
Yeah. And again, to talk about the big picture, the reason that you want a model like this is because any acquirer is going to look at what they call your TTM EBITDA, or your trailing 12 months of earnings. Right. And so that means you need monthly data that you can then analyze and make what's called a pro forma or forward-looking EBITDA calculation. So you have to start there. You need your monthly income statement and your monthly balance sheet, because that's what an investor is going to look at. And every month when the books close, you get a new 12th month and you get rid of the 13th month that was a year ago. So you have every month you have a new 12-month period. And so investors are always looking at that. How is your business trending compared to when we started this conversation versus when we want to close the deal? And so you need to take that raw information, strip out the one-time things that we just talked about, assuming they're actually one-time in nature, and then you use that to then make a forward-looking monthly forecast. So people say, okay, here's what it's going to do in the future. And then me as the buyer, how can I eventually sell it? Because that's the goal. You need to kind of prove that the current buyer is going to make some kind of multiple on it, and then ideally the buyer after that as well, because a private equity firm is always going to be thinking about their exit strategy.
Right.
But that comes from just having those clean monthly financials to start. And then you as the owner come up with, well, how is it going to affect the future? And then that's the data that the buyer is going to be using.
That's so good. I love that. Specific to schedules, I did want to come back to this, right? As you're consuming the raw data, right? And you're cleaning it up or you're organizing it, aggregating it, which I do want to talk about that too, because this is a massive issue in, at least in the fitness and wellness franchise model, because of just an inattention to, I think, an integration, but we'll get back to that. The support schedules, when I'm thinking in this industry, CapEx, depreciation, royalties, marketing, lease, debt servicing, are all of those important? Or do you have some, like in the retail world, maybe it's not, specific four-wall fitness wellness, but in the retail world, is that what you're looking for, those specific schedules? Is there anything that I'm missing there that this is a must, you must have?
I'd say the biggest one is headcount and underlying schedule of your census. But what you mentioned earlier is important, that models kind of live or die on these support schedules. And without leaning into AI too much, there's an assumption that right now you take your raw data and you kind of spit it out to AI, you get a 3-statement model, and poof, amazing, and it's done.
I wish.
And the truth is, one is that's not true, but conversation for another time. The support schedules is where AI really has trouble going, and that's where there is so much business nuance, where you might have a headcount schedule or a CapEx forecast or 17 different drivers that just affect your ad spend that are completely unique to your business, of website visits, of people who start a project, get halfway through a project, finish a project, open multiple projects, and all these little percentages and drivers might help you get a revenue figure and then also back into your ad spend and other support costs. And so those are the places where models can really become, one, they can become overly complicated, but two, you also get clarity and granularity into what the business actually does. And so you still want to kind of think about the 80-20, like what moves the needle. I don't want to spend hours and hours forecasting our travel and entertainment if it's not a big line item, right? But if it's things like ad spend, headcount, and other material items, typically every business is going to need a custom schedule to go through that. That's going to give you some kind of subtotal, total headcount, total CapEx, whatever it may be. And then that flows back to the 3-statement model, which is going to give you more accuracy on the profitability, which then gives you more accuracy on the valuation. And it's also going to give you more accuracy on the cash flow, which is going to be super important, one for the owners, but also for the PE buyers, especially if they put some debt on your business, because they need to know that you can cover the principal and interest payments of a loan.
Yes, the DSCR, for those that are probably seeing that now as I'm posting a lot about it, your debt service coverage ratio. And we'll go to the 3-statement model, but the problem that I see a lot, Chris, and I'm sure you see this way more often, is that I'm seeing this top-down budgeting pro forma, if you want to call it a model, but pro forma approach, where it's like, what did we do last year? Let's just add another 2 to 5%, and then we're going to hand that over to the department leaders and let's give it a go. And the issue is all of this variance, which leads to these massive amount of meetings and reforecast meetings, and then scratching your head like, how are we way off? Like we're off 40%. It's like, I'll tell you why. So the key drivers and support schedules, I always like to call it a bottom up, right? These inputs that are driving to then what we're very familiar with out there is the income statement. And then maybe not as familiar, but we need the balance sheet and statement of cash flows or cash flows in general, right? So it's so important. And, I've had a background in finance, and yes, I've always loved this stuff, but I don't know what it was. And as I was doing your intro, I get so excited because people don't realize, and I love that you teach this, and I like teaching people, when you realize that these 3 statements actually connect, they actually connect, they actually impact each other, you start to understand this entire ecosystem of your business and how impactful many of the decisions, for instance, Chris, you're talking about headcount and payroll. We're talking about debt servicing and the amount of debt that you bring on. It might look great as far as an injection of cash, but what is that doing to your balance sheet, right? And so can you walk us through maybe in basic form, why an owner should look at a financial model, should use a financial model that is 3-statement focused and why it's just overall important to just know all three statements and how they connect.
Yeah. So, and I'm glad you brought this up. The real reason zooming out is it's the language of business. And so an investor who's sophisticated is going to be looking at that, and they're going to make an assessment of your business based on those financials. What they really want is an accrual-based income statement. A lot of small owners use cash-based accounting, which is fine. I use cash-based for my small business, but if you want to get a more clear picture of true profitability, it has to be an accrual-based business. And the second it's accrual-based, it means that your net income does not equal your cash. And so then the balance sheet is going to show the adjustments that had to impact the income statement to show kind of what's outstanding or what's left over. And then the cash flow statement is the bridge that ties the two together. And so if you're going to just look at one statement, it's cash flow statement's probably the best, because you say, does this thing actually generate free cash flow, right? And you get a good sense.
I'm pretty sure you put a poll up for that the other day. Statement. I was curious. I was looking at, like, sometimes, people cheat. They go in the comments and put it there. I'm like, what is he going to say? But you just answered it.
Well, yeah, actually, you brought up a good point, because the question is, if I could give you any two of the three statements, which would I give you?
Yeah, that's the one.
You would give the income statement and the balance sheet, because you can build the cash flow statement from the other two. And if you know the steps on how to do that, then you can get that done. And so those are the pieces that an investor is going to be looking at, because they need to know, okay, what's my trailing 12-month profitability, but then how does that translate into cash? And so as an owner-operator, if you're not really finance-minded, you don't necessarily have to have this stuff like dialed in your head. It's a little bit tricky, but you want to have a resource that at least understands this language. And if you say, hey, we just earned $1,000 of revenue, but we're not going to get paid for 2 months, and what does that do for our profitability and our cash? You just need somebody who in their head knows how that affects the three statements and can answer that type of question, because that's what buyers are going to be asking.
So good. I'm going to skip the other two for now, and I would love and encourage people to go check out your work, Chris, to learn more about the summaries, but even more so, and it gets a little technical on the control panel side, but it is good to know the basics and how you can make this thing a living, I like calling it a living doc or a living model, as you use it throughout the year and as you make your adjustments. And hopefully there's a lot of favorable black ink there. I'd love to move into a big problem that right? So it's amazing to have, someone like you who knows how to build these forecasting models. But what we end up finding out is this, let's call it the franchise network, for example. Many of them are on different accounting platforms. It just was never set up to consolidate all of the information. And maybe it should have, but it just never was. They were given the autonomy to select whatever accounting platform. So as you're trying to build KPI dashboards or even get things to roll up in a organized way, you have a lot of what I would call unorganized data or messy data, right? It comes in its different forms. How do you, just knowing how important all of that raw data is, nowadays, what are the tools or what can you do to organize all of that? So as the franchisor, you can, a lot of it goes into the FDD. So it's important that you have that trail, right? Or maybe even these, maybe not a franchise, but multi-unit portfolios in the fitness and wellness space that need to know unit by unit, but also connect the dots.
Yeah, it's a good question. What I find, and this is why I feel like, Excel.
Oh, there we go.
There?
No, yeah, sorry about that.
Okay.
I think that was me. All good.
Oh, good. Yeah, so I'm glad you brought it up. I feel like this is one of these reasons that I think Excel will never die.
Yeah.
Because I've encountered this before in a roll-up strategy where one company uses QuickBooks, another uses Xero, another uses NetSuite, somebody uses a 13-month reporting period, somebody uses 12. And how do you map it all together to see what your roll-up is going to look like? And usually it just comes back to, let's think about this master set of accounts that we want to use when we look at things from a consolidated view. And then we go into the actual data, and at least for me in Excel, I just start tagging stuff column by column and say, or row by row, I guess, in a new column, and say, okay, well, this weird line item that you have that means this, I want to put it in the headcount category. I want to put it in the contractor category. And I will aggregate all of that, let's call it messy data, into a cleaner view of that same data. So now that I'm looking at multiple portfolio companies, I now have an apples to apples view where I can compare them, and then it makes it easier to roll everything up. So there are, Excel tricks to make stuff a little bit more sophisticated, like building lists and all that. So you're not accidentally creating errors. But I've tried to automate some of that stuff with tech, and it's just, you spend more time trying to troubleshoot the system than you would just, hey, I'm going to spend 45 minutes and just go down this P&L, and this should be that should be that. And the beauty of doing something like that, even though it's a little bit painful, is you're also learning the business at the same time.
True.
And I think this gets overlooked all the time. We want this automatic solution of like, just give me the output because I need to move fast and I got more deals to do. And I get that. And there's always going to be another deal to do. But if you skip this step of just like, hey, what is that line item? I'm going to go talk to the CFO. What does that mean? That's helpful, right? As you learn the business, then you really become educated on what you're evaluating, and you become more educated on how that business is going to perform in the future. And so there is value to these manual tasks, even if they are theoretically slower than some automated machines. So I'm pretty old school with that approach. I'm sure there maybe are some faster ones, but I find that taking the time to learn the business and then consolidate everything into a view that I understand is really valuable, both from a cleanup exercise, but also from a strategic exercise.
I was in a meeting the other day, and, I like to use humor every now and then. And so I was waiting for it, just prepped, right? Like, this would be a good drop of humor. Where did you come up with that? And of course, there's, as you're saying, know the fundamentals, know the audit trail, know how it's tied and where it's going, what, key assumptions, et cetera. I said, oh, AI got me there. I don't know. AI got me. And I just laugh at that because I'm like, I really hope, especially those that want to play in this field, like, don't do that. You have to still know, even though it will get faster and it'll get more precise and things will be far easier, whether it's automation or AI gets you there and it's living within your cell, as many are claiming. It's not that easy. It's not exactly how it works, but it's still understand the fundamentals. It reminds me of and I hated it at the time, and now I understand my professors and my teachers around proofs. Do you remember that? The proofs, like, why do I need to do a proof if I know the answer? I don't need to do the work. It was like, some of those, not many, but some of those questions, like, I just know it. But it is so important to understand, how did you get there? To your point, if you know how you got there and you understand the business. So I'm loving seeing all this, like, FinOps, finance and ops kind of commingling now. It's like, get to the ground truth, understand the customer point of view, the team member point of view, understand how all of this works. It's not just a sell. There's so much going on and nuances down on the ground truth in that sell. And so I think I'm just hoping we don't lose that with all of this amazing technology. I'm a big fan of the tech, but we can't lose that because that's where a lot of errors take place. You talk a lot about cash flow, and I know we can't do it visually here. And again, I'm going to keep pushing people to your LinkedIn, Chris. There's great videos that Chris puts together around what is a 13-week cash flow. What's the best way to put it together? What should you be paying attention to? So Chris, from, verbally, do you mind just walking through in its basic form, what is a 13-week cash flow? And why should a business owner that's listening to this today have it?
Sure. And we actually talked a lot about three-statement modeling earlier, but a 13-week cash flow, in my opinion, is more important in the early days. And if it's a new company, that's the model that I'm going to be building first, because it lets us know, do we actually have cash in the bank to pay our people, pay our vendors, and keep the business running. And so the way to think about a 13-week cash flow, 13 weeks is a common convention because it's basically one fiscal quarter. So it's sort of short enough to kind of know what's coming, but long enough to see some trends. In my opinion, 13 weeks doesn't really matter. You can do 4, you can do 52. It's sort of an open view of your bank account. And what is your bank account going to do every single week for the next number of weeks? Or sometimes more accurately, what is it going to do every day? Sometimes I will build them up by day and then summarize them by week, because your week might look great, come Sunday, but on Wednesday, you were in the hole because you had a big bill go out and you didn't get paid until Friday. And so you could be panicking trying to figure that out on a bridge loan on Thursday. But when you look at the model from a weekly perspective, everything's fine. So a lot of times if somebody's really detailed, or if somebody wants to get detailed, I'll build it by day, summarize it by week, summarize it by month, and that sort of thing. And so you're basically just saying, if I open my bank account and I see $100 in there, and I'm going to get $10 in today, and then at the end of the day, I'm going to have $110. And so tomorrow I start with 110, and I just think about the activity that's going to happen each and every day. And I look at the ending balance and I say, is there enough money in here to keep my business going? Can I pay my people, because that's really the most important part. You can potentially stretch some vendors, right? You learn the levers that you can pull, or you say to yourself, hey, wow, that customer, we finished our work with them 4 months ago, but they haven't paid us. And so we got to call them on the phone. And this happens all the time, and especially in like construction industries or things that are very lumpy or contract based, like the work gets done on the ops side and then nobody chases down the actual cash. And a 13-week cash flow is just like a great weekly exercise to build that discipline and make sure like you're getting cash on the terms that you expect. And frankly, if you're tight, you can think about the vendors that you can push and the ones that you can't. Right. And you use that as a planning tool to say, hey, can we at least get through the next quarter? And so I think that's a super important discipline for people to implement. It's definitely not as complicated as a 3-statement model, because it's not about cash and accrual and like, how do I make all this stuff work? It's just my bank account activity. And a lot of owners will understand that view.
It's so true, right? Now, I will say 99%, and I'm typically in the small business to medium size, right? So no head of finance, no CFO. For that reason, they'll bring me on, right, for a certain amount of time. And it's 99% do not have any type of visibility on cash flow other than maybe I open up Chase Bank and I just want to take a look, and then I'm wondering what is going on here type of thing, right? So I love that you talk about cash runway. Yes, you need to know like how many weeks, months, like how much cash do I have on hand to meet my obligations? What I find, and I love when this happens, is it's actually not a inflow outflow problem. Typically, it is a, like you were saying, timing problem. And that's where, when we right size that or we move some things around, and when Chris is talking about the vendor side, it's the whole 15 or maybe it's 30, 60, 90-day terms, right? So understand your vendor agreements and why it's so important you take those seriously. You're not just, yeah. It's funny because we're trained like pay people on time, but then I see it in business, but you don't ask for your money faster than when you're paying, right? And it's just, it's so funny. And this is why it's so important. Like your education should be, we should have it in middle school, high school, because we're not taught these things. We're just taught pay your bills on time and pay them fast. And we're not teaching a lot on the other side. Well, no, you want a healthy cash conversion cycle. And so I love that you chat about this, and thank you for going through that, because it doesn't have to be complicated. It might take some time to put it together, but when you have it, my goodness, when your decisions are being made off of it, should we go after that revolving line of credit? Should we go make that investment in an additional headcount? You start to be very strategic and mindful that everything lives and dies by your DNA of cash, not your top line revenue on a P&L. It's good, right? And it flows through, hopefully flows through at a good clip, but this is where you live and die, Chris. So I'm so glad that you chat about that. As far as timing, is there anything else, like just classic examples of, I'm going to see it. Where do you go when if someone does have a 13-week, where do you go first to see this is probably where they have issues?
It's usually the customer receipts. I think people are often very behind on collecting from customers because I think we have this emotional assumption of what you just mentioned. People pay their bills on time. And when we have a lot of automated payments, especially as consumers, we click a button on our computer and we swipe the credit card and it's done. In business, sometimes it's a lot more antiquated. You're writing checks, you're sending them in the mail, you're cashing them at the bank or with your phone or something, which even with your phone is a new thing, right? And so
or the little machine.
It's not as, the machine. It's not as automated as we assume it is as consumers. And so we think we're getting paid and we're not. And so that's the first thing I look is, are we getting cash in before we're making our payments out? And ideally, we don't want to stretch our vendors, but if we have to keep the lights on them, that's a conversation that you got to have with that vendor. And you kind of, there's more of a gray area to it than maybe I'd like to admit sometimes, but that tool helps get that done. And I think if somebody's listening, they're thinking, it sounds like a great tool, but it sounds a little complicated. Yes, you can make it very complicated by weaving in your AR and AP data and all that stuff. But if you want to just sketch this out in a sheet and have it done today, you just have a line at the top that says what my bank balance started at, a line at the bottom of what it's going to end at, and then each little column, it just carries it forward, and you can just type in numbers. What's coming in, what's coming out, just punch it in. And then you at least have something. Because you can always add more detail later, but sometimes if you're in a cash crunch, you don't want to waste all this time working on a tool.
Yep.
You just kind of need to pencil and paper it out. And a one-page Excel sheet is great for just, hey, let's get through the next 3 weeks and figure it out. And then we can always get more sophisticated. So I think it's important for operators to keep in mind. You can just sketch it out pretty quick on one little spreadsheet.
So you know this, and we'll get into AI here in a sec to close this out, but I use AI at Val Sites in partnership with Stratego to build out the cash flow forecast. But it was so funny, your exact example, we're in a cash crunch, and literally we're looking at 3, maybe 4 weeks of runway, and it's heavy debt servicing, and then obviously main priority payroll. I said, scrap it. None of this matters. None of this detail and how quickly we get it and all the little line items. We're going to go to the basics. What do we need to spend to keep the lights on, to keep the member, in this case, member experience good, and to pay our people? Outside of that, it doesn't, nothing else matters. So I love that you brought that up, because you can make this in its basic format, right? Now, hopefully it's not because your back's up against the wall and it's more of a favorable scenario, but regardless, you can make it in its simple format. It's just visibility so you can make better decisions.
Yeah.
So good.
And I would actually say my closing thought on that is people assume they don't need a cash forecast until they need one.
Yeah, so
And
true.
so my advice would be, even if you're comfortable in your business right now, just build the cash forecast now. See how accurate it is. Was I right that 3 weeks from now I was going to have X in the account? Because you can build the discipline and build the process now so that if you get into a crunch, you know that you have a reliable tool.
Right.
And then you're not panic hiring some consulting firm to build it for you over the weekend, and some 21-year-old analyst is cranking it out that knows nothing about your business, and everybody's freaking out.
Yeah.
Right. So if you build that internal discipline now when you don't need it, that's the best time, even if in your head you're like, this would just be nice to have, but it's not critical. Because I've been the one panic building them so many times, and it would have been nice if they had it from the start. So I would part with that advice on the cash flow.
So good. Well, I want to respect your time. I know you're super busy, but I'd be remiss if I don't ask you about AI. It's obviously the hot topic, but I feel like things are starting to cool down. You don't see something coming out every week. So that's nice so that we can breathe a little. But where are you seeing this in your space, in the FP&A and finance space? How is AI impacting us today? And where do you see it? Like, what should we, for those that are, we have listeners that are from finance executives from some of the groups I mentioned earlier, like the CFO Leadership Council and Alliance Group. How do they position themselves for the future?
It's a pretty open-ended question in that, I kind of have to guess with the information that I have today, and I could be wrong a week from now.
All that raw data.
I think I'm seeing a few things. I think a space where I hang out a lot, which maybe isn't really real life, the LinkedIn and social medias of the world, there's a lot of overblown hype that I find frustrating and distracting. And when I get into client models, I'm finding just one, people either don't care, they're not using it, or it's cool and we maybe use it, or, it's not part of the conversation in the way that we're sort of meant to believe online, because these hot topics create buzz and sizzle. And so the way that I've been using it is just to make the parts of my modeling faster, certain parts that are complicated formulas or back-end code that maybe pulls data into the model quicker than I could have figured out on my own. But I'm not in a place where I'm handing over the keys. I'm not having AI build stuff for me. I know my shortcut keys in my head. It's faster just to do those than it is to prompt the AI and double check its work. So I think a nice future would be where AI is definitely integrated into the spreadsheet software or any kind of FP&A software, but it helps with logic validation, error checking, and giving you good analysis on clean data. If it's not fed clean data, you run the risk of getting a skewed output. And so it kind of all comes back to the cleanliness of that information. And so if you don't have that, you could kind of just go down the wrong path, that you think is right. I use AI a lot in my modeling. I'm not anti-AI, but some of the stuff we talked about earlier of like just going through and doing some of that old school work, that validates the learning. And as an investor, I think of investors as guys older than me. Maybe they're not anymore, but I think of an old guy with gray hair. I don't know that he or she cares about whether I used AI or a pen and paper.
So true.
They just want to know, is investing in this business going to make me money?
Yep.
And so if I just blindly say, hey, oh, I don't know, but like I used AI, so right? You gonna write a check, right? The answer is gonna be no.
Right.
I'm trusting your business expertise to help me guide in that decision. So I think it's kind of like you hand a Ferrari to a race car driver, you're going to get some cool stunts, some sick donuts. You hand a Ferrari to a guy like me, I'm going to take it down the highway and like go 70 and that's going to be it, and then I'm going to get off the exit. So I think it's there to amplify the people that have the finance and accounting understanding and can use it to accelerate certain tasks. I don't envision it as a replacement, and I'd be a little wary if that's ultimately where we ended up.
Agreed. Yeah, and that's another episode. So we're gonna have you come on because I'd love to chat about that side. I think I'm realizing, I'll tell you, while I was bullish from the get-go and spoke a lot about replacement or enhancement, I'm now a little concerned, and maybe that's because I've been spending a little bit too much time on it with my kiddos. And I'm seeing something that is worrisome. It's bothering me. So maybe another episode, sir. I really appreciate you coming on. For those that want to learn more about you, I know I've been putting it out there, but your LinkedIn, is there anywhere else they can connect with you to learn more?
If anybody wants to actually dive into some of the models that we talked about, they're all on my website. It's called financialmodelingeducation.com. No pressure at all, of course, but if that's something that is of interest to help the business, then that would be a good place to go.
So good. Well, this has been another episode of The Owner's Seat. I'm your host, Albert Ramos. And as I always mention, these episodes drop every Monday and Friday at 8 a.m. Central. Chris, such a pleasure. I'm so lucky. This was a bucket list one, sir. So thank you. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. It was great to be here.
My pleasure. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.